Welcome to our work, Jared.
Thanks for having me.
So today we're chatting with Jared Peterson, who is the CEO and co-founder of Peter Lucas Project Management, a local organization focused on providing the gold standard of project delivery, a father, a husband, world traveler, and a storyteller.
Parts of the world, I guess. But yeah,
Yeah,
I guess.
that about cover it?
I think so.
Yeah, awesome. Okay, so I did want to chat about Peter Lucas, but when I was going back through our notes from our initial conversation, I wanted to start by chatting about that moment at 28 years old where you found yourself realizing that you hadn't really realized or hadn't really experienced a lot of real challenge in your life up to that point, and kind of the catalyst for change that moment was in your life.
Yeah, for sure. Like I grew up on a farm. Had what I'd say is like a pretty good upbringing, like a lot of love from my parents, siblings. I have an older brother, younger sister, and just like a really strong family. And as growing up in that, I've always been kind of like, I don't want to say shielded from adversity, but things were always easy. Like school seemed easy, did well in school. Played sports. We had basically a hockey team where I grew up, and that was kind of the only sport. So everybody played that. And yeah, like when I was in, I guess, grade 11, 12, my guidance counselor said, well, Jared, you're good at math, you're good at science, you should be an engineer. And so I was like, okay, well, it seems like a interesting path. Like I had no idea what engineers did, but I, just took that path. And Todd Steen, like one of your guests, used to babysit me. He was an engineer, like he's mechanical. So yeah, it seemed like a decent path, and went through university, maybe faced some adversity there, just sort of setbacks, and learned a lot about myself. But after graduating, my girlfriend at the time, she moved out to Calgary, and so I went with her. But didn't really make a conscious decision to do it. I just kind of followed.
Right.
And so a lot of the things that I'd been doing were just sort of like following along and just sort of meandering through life.
Yeah.
But I ended up in a position where I wasn't really happy where I was. Not even wasn't really happy. I just wasn't happy. I had a job, and like it was a good job, but I hadn't really imagined myself in that position. The relationship that I was in, like that was failing, and just wasn't, again, happy with how I had arrived at that situation. Just a lot of like short-term easy decisions that I had made, and realized that the compounding of all of those easy decisions led me to where I was. And that's where I came to the realization that if I want something bigger, something better out of this life, because we only have this single life that we're given, what do I need to do to make it what I want it? And that's where, I kind of came to the realization, well, I'm the one responsible for this. I'm the one responsible for these decisions. And that's why I need to make the decision to make my life, to make it what I want it to be. So it was at 28, yeah, when I came to that realization, and I guess has kind of been really a tipping point, I'd say, in my path.
Yeah. What I find is so interesting, Jared, is like kind of what you're describing is really living with intention, right? And I feel like so many people, especially through this podcast, has prompted so many conversations as people are hearing the stories of people that are doing really work that's aligned for them in a very authentic way. I'm hearing a lot of stories about like, how do I get there? Like, how do I get to the point of doing really aligned, authentic work? And that's been a big theme, is that I think some folks have been pretty intentional, maybe not at 28 years old. This seems to be more of a phenomenon that people hit in their mid 30s, early 40s. But I think just like that realization at 28 that you need to be intentional, or the momentum of life will just kind of sweep you up and take you to the next job and the next position and the next relationship, or just in the same path in the same relationship. Like, I think you're saying it so casually, but like, what brought you to that realization? Just like that kind of deep, unsettling unhappiness, kind of just nothing was really bringing you joy.
Like I was working in Fort McMurray, and I remember distinctly sitting, so we were staying in camp, and just looking around, and everybody just seemed really lonely, you know? And I know a number of the people that were working up there were divorced and, you know, still having to maintain that job for like just to support, you know, their family or whatever. Um, and just kind of like clicked where it's like, this isn't what I want. Like, I don't want to maintain this trajectory.
Right.
Like, so to be able to change that, I need to change, you know? Um, and yeah, like, I don't know, there was I think a big thing really for me, um, one of my best friends that I used to work with, he one day said, Jared, I'm quitting and I'm going to go travel the world. I was like, you can't quit. Like, you have a job, you have like bills, you have all of this stuff. He's like, well, no, I've saved up money, taking 6 months off, 3 months in Southeast Asia, 3 months in South America. You know, you should come with me. And I'm like, there's no way I can do that, right? But he kept poking me, and eventually he's like, well, why don't you just like come with me down to Lima, like to Peru, and we'll spend, you know, you can at least start the trip with me. And so I was like, okay, well, I was working 10 days in, 4 days off, figured if I could take sort of that one shift off, I'd have 18 days to like to travel with him. So packed my bags, we flew down to Lima. It was just the time of my life. Like, it was so much fun. You know, we get down and we're trying to order food the first day and like nobody speaks English. You know, like all of a sudden you're out of your comfort zone. You're the outcast now, right? You're
Right.
like sitting in Saskatoon here. It's like I'm pretty accustomed to how everything works and how, you know, how to order a burger, you know.
Yeah.
There you have to learn. You have to learn on your toes, and just the thrill of it was just incredible.
See, like just even right there, Jared, what you're describing, like not having the language or not understanding like how to order food for sustenance, you call it thrilling. I think a lot of people would be very uncomfortable with
Yeah.
that experience, right?
Yeah.
Like there's something there.
Well, and it's terrifying, right? Like
Yeah.
that trip itself, you know, like I flew back and I started working again, and you know, he kept emailing me saying how amazing that was. But it just kept, yeah, it was just kind of like, well, made the decision to get into that position, and it was terrifying. But at some point, like your brain is releasing those chemicals, and it's however you decide to look at it, where either you're terrified, scared,
Yeah.
or you're excited. And yeah,
It's a choice.
it's a choice.
Yeah. Very much so.
Yeah.
So around that time is kind of when you came up with the idea of Peter Lucas, correct?
Kind of, yeah.
Kind of. Okay.
Yeah.
Talk to me to your path, like from kind of that realization at 28 years old. Sorry, did you pursue mechanical engineering?
I'm a civil engineer.
Civil. Okay. So you
Yeah.
got your bachelor's in civil engineering, moved out to Alberta. We're doing some work. Wasn't really aligned. The relationship wasn't aligned. How do you get from there to creating this business?
Yeah. So, again, was working like on this 10 and 4 schedule, which I feel is the worst schedule in the world. But,
Not a lot of
and
balance with that.
no,
Yeah.
no.
Especially because you're traveling typically.
Well, in 13-hour days, so you're up there just working nonstop. It takes a full day to like get acclimatized to real life again. You have 2 days, and then you got to get ready for work again. And so after, I was doing that for about a couple of years, but ended up, I guess, where there were independent contractors working like right beside me, making way more money than I was making, and you know, spoke to my bosses at the time about that, and they didn't seem to have any flexibility or want to help me out, and so kind of said, okay, well, how do you start a company? And they walked me through the steps, and it was actually quite easy. So that's kind of how I realized that was a path, and thought, you know, and it was something further on where it's like, because initially I was an independent contractor, and that was kind of like the path I was going down, and that's how I got back into Saskatchewan and in the mining industry, was as, I guess, the entity which is now Peter Lucas Project Management. it was just like getting introduced to the opportunity to start a business. Getting like once I had that introduction, then you kind of realize all of these things are easy, or they're just steps that you have to take. I shouldn't say they're easy, but
Right.
and once you make those steps, then you kind of continue to set yourself up for success.
Yeah. And how many years into it now?
Uh, so that's 2011. So I guess, yeah, about 13.
13, yeah. So you really started off as taking like a contractor position at a potash mine in Saskatchewan.
Yep.
And then you one employee
Yep.
and then built it to what it is today.
With a lot of help. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure.
Yeah. How many employees today? Like
I think we're at about 60.
60.
Yeah.
Okay.
And we've kind of ebbed and flowed.
So, and it's a big question. So feel free to answer this in stages. But from there to here, there had to have been some big lessons and some big just learnings along the way. And it's not always a lesson, but it's like understanding a concept, right? Like, so what are some of like, when you think about the journey of Peter Lucas, what are some of those big standout lessons for you?
I think the biggest thing I can say is every challenge that we've been faced with, or that I guess that I maybe have taken on, I've like succeeded at. And so if you put in enough effort and intention, you can achieve anything. Is kind of like, I would say, my philosophy. So
Yeah.
if like taking that approach to any challenge that you're kind of faced with, you can see the other end of it. You can see yourself coming out of it. And then you kind of just like enter that situation with the confidence, knowing you'll get through. So that's probably one of the biggest things. But obviously, it's taken a lot of time to come to that realization.
Yeah.
And, it started on the projects I was working on. Like, again, I'm a civil engineer, like geotechnical background. So a lot of earthworks. When I first started out there, it was to help with like a tailings facility, but then there's mechanical projects to do. And those mechanical projects, had electrical components to it and instrumentation. And so started getting familiar with all of these disciplines that I've never dealt with before. And, getting into even like power generation, where that's not really an avenue I ever saw myself going down, but what I feel like I was able to succeed at was just communicating with people and being able to bring people together.
Right.
There's a lot of very knowledgeable contractors and operators, like tradespeople. You're just bringing everyone together and coming up with solving problems.
Yeah.
And so that's
that curiosity, bringing people together and communicating through an issue, right?
And you can get to the other side of it. So that's kind of been, I think, how I got to that realization. And in, I guess it was 2017. So it was my daughter's first birthday, was my last day on the mine site. Me and my partners at the time kind of saw the market dipping, and
the potash
commodity market. Yeah. So the prices were going down. The sites were going through a lot of, I would say, like efficiency measures, like cost cutting and stuff like that. And said, well, either we ride this into the ground, or we make a conscious decision to have me step out and try to grow the business. So we're not just, in that drive to the race to the bottom. So that was really a big, I would say, challenge, because we didn't know what the outcome was going to look like.
Right.
So Luke and Connor, my two partners at the time, they stayed working billable work, and they were paying for me to try to drum up more business. I've never done business development in my life, never done marketing or sales or anything. And just kind of sat there and tried to figure it out. Lots of Googling, lots of just like, but it's kind of like everything else. It's just a problem. How do you solve this problem? Well, you got to get familiar enough with the problem to be able to see where a solution could fit in. And then that's, I'd say one of the bigger challenges that we've faced and overcome.
So after Googling and kind of spending some time sitting with it, like how do you start business development in that industry? Essentially project management for large corporations that are arguably at that point reducing their capital, like their maintenance budgets. Yeah. So tell me what that even like, is it relationship? Is it a value proposition? Like kind of what was the focus around that?
It was kind of like that value proposition. And I think that's really been the underlying philosophy of Peter Lucas. And I would say from my experience in Fort McMurray, like I was working for an engineering company being charged out at like a fairly high rate. And these independent contractors were kind of in this middle ground, but they were brought on through a staffing agency. And so they didn't really have a lot of, there was no support for them. They were really just like on an island themselves and sort of saw this niche kind of right in the middle where we could put more money in the pockets of employees. We could charge a lower rate and be more flexible in being able to to do that. So we're competitive with, the bigger engineering companies, but are able to provide more value to the employees. And that's kind of where the whole thing sort of stemmed from. And that's what we were, I guess, trying to pitch.
Right.
And I think it was maybe that value proposition combined with just being like one of the owners and speaking, like I could talk to the client and they know they're talking to somebody who has a vested interest in making sure that this relationship is going to succeed.
Right.
So I think, we were very fortunate to have clients kind of put their trust in us.
And so today, so you talk about early days, you're at the mine, your billable hours, you're working on projects, leading projects. Then you kind of moved into a business development phase to just ensure that you guys could diversify your customer base enough to keep going.
Yep.
What does your role look like today with 60 employees and 3 partners?
Yeah. Today it's like there's still business development. It's probably more relationships now, but I like operating at and looking at the big picture and seeing how we can fit into that. And so now we have a much broader geographical footprint. Industry-wise, we service a number of new industries that, we never would have. And a lot of that's been very intentional in terms of like how we want to stabilize the business, diversify the business to provide that stability and continue to grow. And so it's always just kind of making sure that the levers are kind of being pulled when they need to and just making sure that we're kind of always in the right direction, I guess. So never sticking our neck out too far. But again, taking on a desirable level of risk to be able to achieve the outcomes that we're.
And what are some of the new industries you guys have tapped into?
Well, energy is a big one.
Right.
And energy and infrastructure is another really big one for us. When it comes to like mining, the commodities kind of like there's sort of some diversification in there as well to provide that stability. So going after different commodities.
Uranium, potash, gold, oil.
Yeah, copper and,
And then just kind of being like knowing some people that have either worked in your organization or have worked with you guys as a client. You guys, the sense I get outside looking in is that you and your partners have been very intentional about culture within the organization. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, I think that's a fair statement. Like, I think when it comes to being intentional, we want to attract and retain people that also have that same philosophy. And so I think, when we say the things we say and we do the things we do, personally, I can't lie. Like, I just don't feel like that just isn't natural.
Right.
So for me to be able to stand behind something that we're offering, I have to have my full belief in it. And so I think that's where that comes from. Right. Because it is genuine. We want the organization to be a place where everyone feels welcome, where everybody can contribute at their highest and, you know, best use. And if we can provide that culture, yeah, we're creating that environment. And if we create that environment, then good people are going to come to us.
Yeah. And that's like, it's so interesting that you say that. That is like, and I can think you and I chatted a little bit before the mics came on. The theme I noticed in kind of my first round of podcasts is just how the people that are really doing exceptional work, the people that are gaining traction, adding a lot of value, whatever it might be, like exceptional work looks a little bit different depending on what you're doing. But whoever's doing exceptional work is doing it from a very authentic place. And that's kind of like what you're talking about. Like, I can't lie. So what I say I'm going to do, I need to do, because there has to be alignment. It has to be authentic to you, right? And project management, like the projects themselves, was that like, I understand the business and why you took that path, but was like the actual project management world itself aligned for you? You're something you're passionate about?
Yeah, it's funny. And it's something that I probably just fell into. Again, like every summer job I had going through university was doing carpentry. Like I was a laborer working for a construction, like my dad's construction company.
Okay.
And yeah, so I understood construction. People were always bad mouthing engineers, and so I was always kind of like, you know, listening and
Construction site is a really bad place for engineers sometimes.
right.
Yeah.
After graduating, when I would get, like, my first job was as a project manager working for the Ministry of Highways.
Okay.
It seemed natural. Like I understood construction, I knew what we were trying to build, and had the technical knowledge to be able to kind of back that up. So that was fun. But then when I moved out to Calgary, it was a much more technical role, and so I wasn't as maybe in like I didn't enjoy those aspects as much. But then I got back into kind of the project engineering side of it,
Right.
and was able to provide a lot more value in doing that, and then ultimately into a project management role. And yeah, it's been very natural because I enjoy, you know, bringing people together to solve those problems. That's like what project management is.
It really is. Yeah.
And so yeah, just working with people to solve interesting problems.
Yeah.
Coming at it with a curious mind, and just keep trying to learn. Like that's kind of been it. So
yeah, common themes for you along the way.
Yeah.
It's interesting you say like that concept of adding value. Like I had anybody who ever reaches out to me for career advice is like, how do I get my boss to notice me, or how do I figure out what role I want to be? And it's like, you just got to figure out where you add value. Where you add the most amount of value is probably where you're going to be the happiest, which is going to motivate you to do even better work.
Yeah.
And that's always the path, is like, so you've been very lucky. You found that really early.
Well, for sure. And I don't know if you've read the book Linchpin by Seth Godin.
No.
And he speaks about that exact thing. It's like, make yourself indispensable. You know, find the thing that makes you better than everybody else, so that you have your own unique value that only you can provide, and your boss or whoever it is needs you, and you're just making everyone's lives easier.
Yeah.
And you found something that you're really good at.
Yeah.
So
it's win-win.
Win-win.
Yeah. You're adding value. They see the value. And
Absolutely.
then it's, yeah.
Absolutely.
Amazing. And so my last question about the projects world, like where project management, I think you and I are very aligned as to what it is. I've also seen it go really well and really poorly sometimes. Like, where do people get project management wrong?
Like I think whenever somebody says, what makes a good project manager, it's always like communication. What makes a bad project manager? It's like communication. And the funny thing is like communication just means so many different things to so many different people. Yeah. So you have to be able to connect with the one person that you're speaking to, or the group of people that you're speaking to, and making sure that you're actually making that connection and not just sharing information. Like, I think that's where, you know, communication really matters, and how that probably fails. But there's just different personality types, and there's just like people that just have different values in how things should go, you know, and so I think first and foremost, you just need to connect with whoever it is you're working with, and once you've kind of formed that connection, then you know that what you're communicating is actually, resonating with them, and you can actually have that dialogue.
Yeah. Communication is equal parts, if not more heavily weighted towards listening than speaking. And I think sometimes that listening is the part that you might be, articulating your points very well.
Mm-hmm.
But if the person on the receiving end is not understanding, or you're not understanding some of their concerns, you're not getting anywhere. Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
What I think, so season 1, again, chatting with so many people that are doing incredible work, but also what kept coming up throughout that season is how business or organizations, corporations or small business, well, I'm not going to call your business small, but
We're a small
individual
business.
owned, 60 employees, I feel like you're getting big. But so whether it's a large multinational organization or Peter Lucas Project Management, the thing that kept coming up is there's so many ways that we've done business, specifically around people, but really how we've done business for the last 50 plus years that needs to change, right? And we saw some of the cracks of that with COVID and the need for flexible work and whatnot. But it's bigger than that. Like another thing that came up in season 1 is we're really, like, as we talk about more inclusivity in organizations and attracting more minority groups and women, it changes the lens that we look at our work, right? So for example, construction, very labor intensive, back-breaking work, which when we now understand leads to higher risk of mental health issues and addiction, right? So when we talk about trying to bring women into those same roles, we'll talk about re-engineering or redesigning the work for women, but we're comfortable with having men doing the back-breaking work that's really kind of hurting them in some big ways, right? So the theme that keeps coming up, and whether it's flexible work or flexible work around shifts or flexible work around how the work is being done or redesigning the work being done. One theme that I kind of want to tackle for this next round of podcasts is just unlimited thinking. Because I think we get so limited in our thinking that we feel like we can't solve these problems, right? Because we're looking at it in a very traditional lens of how it's been done for the last 50 years. So we see all these roadblocks and all these reasons why not. And like, Jared, you're a master, it seems like, or it comes very organically and very natural to you to not see the roadblock, but to see it as more of a challenge or a problem to solve. You come at it from a very curious perspective. Yeah. So I just wanted to share that with you. And like, what are your thoughts when you hear that? Like, just that the limited thinking is really, from my perspective so far, and I reserve the right to change my opinion, but that our own limited thinking as leaders is the thing that's preventing us from changing the way that we work.
Yeah, and I think that's brilliant to be able to, identify that as what's got us here so far, right?
Yeah.
Well, there's a number of things that aren't the best or most optimal way to operate. So, I think one step is like to identify like what has worked, what hasn't worked. And, when you're trying to solve any problem, you really have to understand the landscape. And I think there's been a lot of work to be able to identify like what that landscape looks like, what the barriers are, the biases that we all share, or, that everybody has, right? And once you kind of like, you're just able to step back and sort of like look at this larger picture and say, okay, well, if this is the situation we're in now, what do we have to do differently? And how can we end up where we want to be? And like, because you don't have to go through the barrier, you can just go around it. Okay, what would that look like? How do we make sure that more women are involved in like the hiring practices, or that, are getting the opportunity to be able to participate in like doing construction work, right? In the industries that like Saskatchewan, especially, right? Construction, mining, like energy, like traditionally very male-oriented industries. And if we're trying to continue to grow those industries, like, we have to be able to have jobs that are able to be executed by anybody, making sure that, everyone is supported both mentally and physically when they enter the work site or whatever.
Yeah.
That just has to be like the way it is going forward, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, I guess you're kind of like redesigning an entire industry or industries, but that's the work that's necessary if that's the outcome you're trying to achieve.
Right.
So I don't know if that's maybe just kind of a ramble, but like I have two daughters, right? Like I have a vested interest in making sure that this world, that they can succeed as much as possible in this world. You know, I want to eliminate every barrier for them so that they can succeed. And I get to do that as part of my day-to-day job, you know, to help
Yeah.
eliminate those barriers. And we do a lot of work like that within Peter Lucas. And yeah, it's just something that I guess I'm really proud of in terms of providing equitable opportunities to everyone,
Yeah.
whatever that looks like. So
And when you think of your two little girls, what do you think just today, 2024, what do you think the barriers are that they are going to face specifically?
I think a lot of like it's almost like it takes generations to work through a lot of these situations. So I think a lot of the challenges that exist today are still going to be things that they're faced with in the future. You know, the province or like Canada, I guess more generally, like I forget the number, but there's like hundreds of thousands of construction jobs that are supposed to be created by the end of the decade, and there's like no workforce to be able to do that.
Right.
So how do you do that? Well, you can't just like invent new people. So either you have to bring people in, or technology has to play a part in being able to overcome that. And so I think there's going to be some kind of combination, where you know that's what 2030 will look like, or 2040 or whatever.
Right.
So I don't know if they're necessarily barriers or challenges that they're going to be faced with from that perspective, but I think there's opportunities for them by being able to leverage, you know, different tools and technologies and things, to be able to do the work. I
Right.
guess.
Yeah. Yeah.
I
For
don't know
sure.
what, like, I guess, how do you see that?
Yeah. So, and maybe I'm coming at it from a slightly different angle. Like my daughter's 4. So I be honest, like I'm very aware of maybe and I think there's limitations for both genders, for men and women. I'm very aware of the limitations or the barriers. And again, they're barriers that you can usually just go around, but they're there nonetheless. So worth mentioning. I'm very aware of what I had to face, maybe not so much aware of what this next generation is going to face quite yet. But I think because there's so little representation of women in particular places, and that you just immediately, there's some bias that you face, and there's some having to, like, I want to call it having to prove yourself. So, you know, certainly for my generation, I can say that barriers that women had to face is that you have to be a little bit better prepared. You just have to be a little bit better than maybe your male peers, because you have to prove that you are able to do the job, you're able to hold the role, that you're able to be a leader, or whatever it might be, right? I'm sure doctors, even though it's not as male dominant in the medical field, I'm sure female doctors would say the same thing, right? But, you know, to your point, I also feel like I had more opportunity, right? I had the old grumpy guy on a job site that yelled at every young man that came before me never yelled at me. So that was a little bit more comfortable and things like that, right? But yeah, so that, and then and I didn't have to face this. Lucky enough, I have a really great partner. But I think what I see a lot of my peers struggling with is the child care, motherhood thing, right? Like the society, the way that the world that we live in is designed for mothers to carry more of that burden than their male partners. And that's still true today, I think. Yeah. But and like some of it's biology. Like, you know, you're probably not going to be able to carry a pregnancy before the end of our lifetime, right?
No, but like I agree with that 100%. I mean, and you know, again, like our girls are a little bit older, right? Like, so there's not that same, you know, physical need for sustenance, yeah, everything like that. So and I try to balance, like, for every hour of work that I do, my wife has the ability to do that same amount. And so I feel like we have a really good balance where she'll drop the girls off at school in the morning and I'll be able to pick them up at the end of the day. And, we'll be able to share those duties just so that she can have every opportunity to succeed in her career.
Right.
Because, I think that is just the way that, if we can share that with our girls growing up and they can see that, I feel like it's going to set them up where that's just normal.
Yeah.
In the more situations we can get into where, that becomes the norm, I think that's maybe one of those things that helps reshape.
Totally. 100%. Yeah. And it's the same thing. Like I did a podcast about women and work, and like one of the women, her kids are maybe 10, 12 years older than mine. And her husband was a very equal partner. So 10, 15 years ago. And he kind of received some roadblocks and some barriers and some judgment at his workplace because he was doing exactly what you're talking about, right, Jared? Like just doing your part of the parenting and the raising of the children. And like, so I think if we can normalize men doing as much as women for the childcare portion, then maybe we can get to the point where we can normalize women in leadership positions or women doing big jobs, right?
Sure.
And we're really women doing any jobs, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, it's two sides of the same coin.
Yeah.
Yeah, it really is.
Well, and I think that's where that equity comes in, right? Like you have to really make it an equitable opportunity, I guess, to do that. So
for sure. And like men and women are different. Like there's just like, I'm sure you being surrounded by women in a household, I can like, there's just differences, right?
Yeah.
Is that fair to say?
That's fair to say. I mean, like every person's different too, right? And
Yes.
there's so many just different ways to, I guess, identify. Like we all have so many identities, right? And I think that's always something that I'm trying to be cognizant of. Any situation that I enter into is just like, well, how does everyone kind of like identify themselves in this situation? Like.
Yeah.
We'll be able to find commonalities, common identities, but then we're probably different in other avenues.
For sure.
And I think that like when you can have shared identities with people, that's where you're really able to connect. Or when you're able to even just like speak about them.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
And you kind of like label that, and you can speak to that and say, yes, that's how I feel. That's how I, believe myself to be, or the situation to be, or whatever it is. Then, we're just able to have, better dialogue.
Better, yeah.
Able to communicate better.
Better understanding, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we weren't planning to talk about this, but just it's heavy on my heart these last couple months. There's so much divide. Like whether it's like I'm talking politics now, whether it's Saskatchewan, we're pretty much like not split quite down the middle, but we're split. BC split, the US split, right? And you're talking about having some type of common understanding or just really hearing and understanding someone's perspective to create better dialogue and better communication. I don't know. I just wanted to hear your take about, we're so divided and like, that's just reality, but it's like, how do we move forward when 50 or 55 or 60% of the population is on one side and the other half on the other side? Like that's a tough place to move forward from.
Yeah. I don't believe I have the answer to that. Everyone's just facing different challenges. Right. And so it almost becomes a shouting match where everyone's just like, well, my thing's most important. The thing I'm being faced with is most important. And everyone's like, no, this is most important. And you just like the whole world is always trying to come to equilibrium, right? So it's happened forever since, humanity began.
Yeah.
There have been societies that have come and gone, and where, it's always in this constant flux.
Yeah.
And we're in another period where there's a lot of turbulence.
Yeah.
And if history shows anything, it's probably not going to be favorable. unless we can find a way to resolve it peacefully.
Peacefully, yeah.
You know, there are wars across the globe right now, right? Canada and the US, like, we have involvement in those wars. And yeah, it's there are just so many competing priorities that I think it's really difficult, because you can't really pinpoint where you need to focus your efforts, because
Right.
everybody's just looking at the problem differently, and nobody's trying to come to that, like, understanding the common ground, or
Right.
coming to common ground even. It's just getting to the point where now that it's so divided, it's just diverging even further and further, and it's just, people are shouting louder and louder.
There's momentum there now. Yeah.
Yeah, and yeah, I don't know. I feel like it's a scary time, but probably a lot of people have felt like that throughout history. So I don't know.
Yeah. And my brother's he's really in the political world a little bit, and he's an analyst, writes reports for the government. And anyways, he always is quick to remind me that, like, reality is we live in the best time ever when you're talking about, like, access to food, clean water, child mortality rates. Like, from a worldwide perspective, we're living in the best time ever, and it's a good reminder. But I think what you said about everybody's facing different challenges, and it's true. Like, everybody's facing different challenges, and everybody has some fear attached to those challenge. And it's like, just feels like we're living in this fear-based, policy-driven world, right? Like, everybody's just afraid about what gender means to them. So we have to define what gender means to young kids, because it makes us more comfortable and it mitigates that fear, or whatever. Like, that's just one example. But yeah, it's just like, it feels like we're living in this, like, fear-driven world, versus, like, forgetting that we have 80% of things in common, which is everybody wants healthcare, education, good jobs, whatever that means to you. Like, that's what 90% of people's main priorities are.
Absolutely.
Not the 20% we're fighting over.
Yeah, being able to provide for your family, and making sure that, you know, your children are set up for success, and, like, you know, that no, absolutely, I agree. Like, it's we are so fortunate, you know, and if you can look at the situation through that lens, you know, maybe that's that initial step to be able to help bring people together. But I feel like that fear, because all of our decisions are truly based on our emotions, and no matter which logic you want to apply, the underlying, like, driver behind that are your emotions.
Right.
And, like, there's a number of studies and stuff that kind of, like, back that up, where if you're not in a strong emotional state, well, the decisions you're going to make, even if you feel you've come to them logically, like, it's not going to be the best situation. And if everybody has, you know, that fear attached to what they're pushing, you're just going to end up butting heads, and over and over and over again. And that's where, you know, just fighting is never really the solution, right? But that's where you end up. So
yeah. And fear is really like the story you tell yourself about a situation. So it's like, it's imperative, like, it's flawed. It's so flawed, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and that's where that mindset comes back in, right?
Yes.
You have a decision, or you have a choice, whether or not you want to be, like, fearful and scared, or if you want to use that as an excitement and a motivator for change, or however you face that situation. So
yeah. And this kind of ties into what we're talking a little bit, but, you know, leadership is a term I use quite broadly. It applies to work, specifically in, like, the type of work you do, but also when you're a parent, you're a bit of a leader, right? A very humbling leadership job. But what does it mean to you? Like, what does that role mean to you, to be a leader at work? And what does it mean to be a leader at home?
yeah, that's a great question. I think it needs to mean the same thing. It's just the people that are maybe following or approaching the situation differently. You know? As a leader, like, I feel we all have, you know, maybe not an obligation, but I think you need to approach it where what you're doing is authentic, where what you're doing, like you want to lead by example, I guess, is probably how I've been raised and how I've found success. And it's doing the things that you say you're going to do, and, you know, being able to sleep at night with the decisions that you've made, because you have to make those hard decisions. And I am very transparent, I would say, with any situation that I come into. Like we were talking about before, like with my dad's incident, could have shielded my girls from that, but made the decision to be transparent with them and tell them what happened. And, you know, they are scared. They're fearful. Like we've had a lot of, you know, sleepless nights from nightmares and stuff like that. But I would much rather have that situation where I can work with them through those emotions and being able to, you know, like show them that there are bad things that happen in this world, but there's also a lot of good.
Yeah.
And you just have to prepare yourself for every situation, because you don't know what life's going to throw at you.
Right.
It's, you wake up one morning and the world's going to be completely different than it was yesterday.
Yeah.
And your ability to react to that and respond to that, I think that's everything that, like, as a leader, I really try hard to be the same person that I am in good times and in bad times.
Right.
And I don't know. I think that's
Providing that solid foundation.
yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
So if they can rely on me to be dad and to be the same dad in 99% of the situations, I feel like I'm doing my job.
For sure. So. And this aspect of leadership is maybe a little bit different at home than at work, but it's like that setting vision and direction. Yeah. Do you feel like that's your role?
I'm definitely pushing it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Again, like, I really enjoy looking at the big picture. And so, you know, that's something that I've just naturally been drawn to, and kind of look at everything that's been done in the world is incredible. And it's been done by a number of individuals. And it's like, well, I'm an individual. I'm a person. Like, why can't I do this? Why can't I take on those challenges, you know, no matter how big they are? So I feel like it's always been, just looking at big challenges and trying to help overcome that. And I don't know, I guess I just enjoy that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you like doing that as well? Or like, what's your experience kind of going through that?
Yeah. You and I have that in common, like the bigger picture, and kind of like, like just setting strategy. Like I find the more complicated the market or the situation, and kind of just so I'm thinking specifically about my day job right now, but like, I love to like kind of dig into the details, but I usually like dig in and get out really quick. I just kind of need to get a lay of the land to figure out the right direction to go in, and then bring everybody along. Right. But where I will say I'm just now kind of really leaning into this over the last few years is unlimiting my thinking. I've worked for the same corporation for 20 years. I'm 40 years old. So, there's some environmental conditioning that came organically through working in one corporate environment, which evolved and changed over the 20 years. But so what I'm really trying to do right now is unlimit both, kind of starting to become more aware of like the biases and limitations that came to me from my environment, and also the ones that I inherently grew up with. So I'm really focusing on unlimiting myself. So like strategy, like figuring out where we need to go is definitely comes natural to me. The unlimited part that seems to come very organically for you is pretty new to me. But what I'm experiencing just over the last couple of years is I'm trying to unlimit and trying to figure out how we need to get, and the way I think about it is like, okay, we've always been told to think about outside of the box. What if we just get rid of the box? That's usually the analogy. And I feel like that's kind of your default. But I'm sure I can't imagine you're surrounded with 60 plus people around you that are as unlimited in their thinking as you are. So you have probably come across resistance. I'm making some assumptions here, whether it's from your leadership team, your partners, there's probably been some resistance to the level of unlimited thinking that you seem to
100%.
live in. Yeah. Talk to me about that.
Well, I mean, like when you describe, coming up, setting the vision, everything like that, and getting everybody to come along, like, how do you approach that? I guess maybe is
Yeah.
question back to you first.
And this is something I've had to develop. It doesn't come naturally to me, but I've learned to really over communicate. And the reason it doesn't come naturally to me is because I get to it very quickly. I can do the scan, understand the situation, understand the environment very quickly, and then get to the decision really quickly. And in the time that it's taken me to do that, people are, and then, like, in fair enough, like, I am in a leadership position and everybody has one little slice of it. So everybody will be understanding their slice of it. Meanwhile, I see the big picture, right? So I've just learned that I need to, for every, like, if I think I need to communicate about something 5 times, it's actually 25 times. So I've learned to, like, get a lot of patience with what I feel is over communicating, but it's what is needed by my team and the folks around me. Just because they're not privy to the big picture, or they have different gifts. Maybe their gifts are living in the details or the plan or the execution. Maybe it's not the big picture piece, but yeah. So that's kind of been my approach, which is frustrating sometimes.
Well, no, for sure. I mean, I think that's the part of it that is like, and I also like find that a big challenge is, you can have an idea and it's clear in your head, like this is the path that we have to go. And trying to get everybody to follow is it's tough, right? And with partners in the business, like we all kind of have to sign off on that direction, and that's where it's challenging. Like, but at the same time, like I understand that it is a challenge, but I also see it as something that's good because it makes sure that we are making strong, logical, like long-term decisions that are like, maybe we won't grow as fast as like this path, but we're going to stay in business. And at the end of the day, that's more important than just like
Growth.
Yeah, just growth at all costs. So even though I'm always pushing like this way, it is good to also kind of have people that are just like, let's just tap the brakes. Let's like make sure that, this is the exact right direction and stuff. So I don't know. It's just that balance. And I guess, it was very frustrating several years ago in that situation. But now I feel more comfortable with it, and we can have much, I think, better dialogue because we all kind of understand where everybody fits in. And it's funny because, the 4 of us, like I've 3 other partners, we went on, we had rented, like side by sides, the individual ones. I don't know what you'd call them. I guess an ATV type thing. Yeah. But we were all just going through the desert, and the way that we work is very similar to the way that we drive through the desert. Like, I feel like I'm always just like trying to go as fast as possible in every direction, just like see the landscape, identify what's going on. And, there's others that are just like more slow and steady and just kind of like making sure everything's, and yeah, it was just like it was interesting to see just like what our natural inclinations are and how that, kind of comes out of in all of our actions.
Right.
And at the end of the day, we all ended up back home safely. And that's kind of the best situation possible.
That's the point. Where were you guys in the desert?
We're in Arizona.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Just outside of Phoenix. So.
Okay. Yeah. So it sounds like you guys have some good diversity of thought that kind of grounds a lot of that strategy, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we're all engineers, so we're also kind of lack of diversity in other aspects, but we kind of understand where everybody's coming from. So
yeah, I mean, it's working.
so far, so good.
Yeah, and that's like, The other thing I found just as you're talking, what's helped me, and I've noticed it because I've had different leadership teams in the time that I've been GM. This team that I have now, we're very aligned from a value perspective. Like we all, everybody has maybe a similar appetite for growth. Everybody has a similar approach to people. It's not identical. Like nothing's the same for sure. Like there is some healthy debate, but I did find, and I didn't notice it because you don't know what you don't have until you have it. So now I realize like how quickly we can move together and how just that alignment on values has been helpful. I'm sure it limits us in some ways, even as I'm saying that. Like I'm sure there's maybe less diversity of thought because we are so aligned on values, but it has helped us move quicker and do better work together.
For sure.
Yeah.
Well, and that's kind of that balance you're always trying to
Yeah.
meet, right? Like it's